You talked about the German heritage, and what would you say that is your church known for a particular? Are they still known for an ethnic food where it's kind of
No,
prominent in their?
I don't think so. We we have written a couple of cookbooks, at least two cookbooks in our day, or the women of the church have put them together. And I can't say that going through those you pick them out as specifically ethnic, because it was a blended church, and it was the Germans marrying the old settlers that gave it a different flavor. And
What about festivals or fundraisers? You're saying about challenges all churches have about money and fundraisers and things like that.
We were a rural church when I came here. We had a number of well, not. It's an industrial area, so a lot of people did go to the steel mills and the shipyards and work away from the farm, and they would continue to do their farms, and still work away, but little by little the land was absorbed by the bigger farms, and so today we have almost nobody that really still farms. Our farm is still farmed, but we're hiring somebody else to farm it from over in the neighboring community. But when I came here in the 50s, there were enough farmers that everybody had chickens, and so we had in the summertime, during the month of July, we served chicken on Tuesday evenings at the church, and it was a tradition that stretched on. I don't know when it was established. It had started probably back during the Depression, and carried on until my youngest son was a teenager, which would have been in the early 70s. We quit serving chicken suppers, and it was every woman's obligation to show up with the chicken cooked and with a pot of broth, and we fried the chicken. I guess we must have cut those chickens up and fried the pieces, and the broth, of course, was turned into good rich chicken gravy and served over homemade biscuits. And already the lakeshore from Vermilion on west was a place where many people came to vacation, and we depended on those people to come to the Brownhelm church on Tuesday evenings. When we quit that, we still adapted one Saturday night in the summer when we had served a chicken supper of some sort, but it's not the same as when we came with those. I remember the one catastrophe that I was party to. I was in charge of the gravy, making this huge cauldron of chicken gravy, and the chickens often came in the night before, and we didn't always have, I don't know, refrigeration. So can you turn that off, or should I just ignore it?
Can you go on? Can you go on?
Yeah,
can
I
you?
can carry on.
We don't have too much longer.
But of course the mechanical thing will come on.
That's okay.
Anyway, I was in charge of gravy, and about 3 o'clock.
You have reached Pat Leimbach's home. She's currently unavailable, but if you would like to call back again later, you can do so usually after 9 in the morning, or she's pretty good up till about midnight. If you'd like to leave a message, please start talking after the beep, and she will get back with you. Thank you. Patricia, I know it's your birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday a day ahead of time. Lori and I and Valerie, the caregiver, are planning a trip into Cleveland on Wednesday morning. And I don't know whether you're available for lunch. It would probably be downtown somewhere, rather than the west side, or maybe the near west side. If you can do that, that's fine. And I'm confirming also that we are going to the Beck Theater on Sunday, and we'll make arrangements for that as soon as Susan Klein gets back from Detroit with her husband, or with her daughter, or whomever she's coming back with, and I can know a little bit more and see if we can manage a lunch on Sunday somewhere on the west side of Cleveland. Anyhow, give me a call when you can. Thanks.
Fred, if I turn it off, I won't get it back on. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I discovered that all the broth had soured. And I was panicky. Somebody went with me to the grocery store, and it looked like one of those mad programs we used to have on grocery, where you could have all the groceries you could get into a cart in a minute. And we ran down the aisle where they were selling chicken broth, and we bought these big cans of chicken broth and ran home. And I tell you that chicken broth was not the same that day.
Are there any other funny stories that you can think of that occurred that?
Well, that of course was just one that I was a party to. The history of these small country churches is that everybody, until very recent years, and especially those churches where there were a lot of farmers, they knew how to cobble, and they knew how to build things, and they knew how to fix sump pumps, and they knew how to get the furnace going on early in the morning. And so everybody worked at that church, and it always has been a problem to know who installed the plumbing, who put in the kitchen, where's the wiring. Those are all great secrets to be passed on from generation to generation. Nowadays, most churches are likely to call a licensed plumber for that. But our church was a handyman's church from the very beginning. There were actually 3 church buildings. The first one was established on the first ridge north of the lake, known then as the well, I don't know. It was north of Northridge, so I don't. Whittlesey Ridge, we called it, because the Whittlesey family lived there, and Whittlesey Road is still identified on the map. And one of the 3 churches, I think, burned. The second, and it might have been that first one. The second one was established it was a wooden frame church, or it could even have been a log church. Probably the original one was log. I don't really know, but the second one had the roof beam had a little dip in it, and they called it the Church of the Broken Back or something. as I understand it, and it had a wooden fireplace, and there was there were notes in the record book that a pail of water was always kept nearby because the mantle was always catching on fire, and they had to douse it probably in the middle of the service on Sunday morning. When I came to the church, we still had a wood-fired wood-fired furnace, and it was the obligation. Well, we had a janitor of sorts, but oftentimes the minister was privileged to go down there and light the furnace on Sundays. Our early ministers, from the time I came there, and I don't know how long before, but they were all students at the Oberlin Theological Seminary. And we were sort of the proving grounds for those guys. There was some professor over there who checked them out, but they were sent out to serve these rural churches. And it was a nice opportunity for those guys because there was always a pastorate, what do you call it? The house from, what do you call it? Parsonage. There was always a parsonage, so they could marry and even start their families while they were still in seminary. And I always said we got all of the, we became a liberal church because we were always benefit of all the latest heresies in the church thinking, and our theology changed from year to year. But the Congregational church was and has always been known as being quite a liberal church. And now it has been known, not our particular church, but within the congregation, there has always been a little variety of opinion, and they have not always taken kindly to letting to the gay membership. Now that's never been a problem in our church. We welcome everybody. We've never voted. You can have a theology going within the church that may be sort of subterranean. It's happening, but we don't make a big deal about it. And the church in the United Church, what was the United Church of Christ in Vermilion, came to blows about some of these points, and they sort of dropped their membership in the state association or the national association. They still, and that was originally a German Reformed church, where the merger never quite fit what the congregation was thinking, I guess.
But you've not had that kind of disruption within
We haven't
your...
had that kind of thing happen, no. And but it was always interesting to those young guys that came out here. They were they only stayed so long until they were ordained, and usually they would be ordained locally, but then they would go off to other places.
You mentioned the parsonage. What is on the church property at this time? What kind of buildings and where is the parsonage located in relationship to the church?
The parsonage is not on the church grounds, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess. I know that nowadays they say it's best to keep them away from the church because the poor pastor and his wife, or she and her husband, as the case may be, are always being badgered by the church members. I don't think that happens in our church. Our parsonage is an old house. It's an old clapboard house, about three houses down from the church on the other side of the road. I have to tell you that we were one of the first churches in the area that had a woman minister, and I'll take credit for part of that because I was on the search committee when we were looking for a minister. And golly, when was that? It was before the women's movement had got into full bloom. It had to have been, let's see, I guess it was in the early 70s, because we've had the woman minister for at least 30 years now. The first one stayed 10 years, and the second one stayed 10 years, and then we had one other one in there, was only here a couple of years, and this one, she's on her sabbatical, so she has to have been here at least 7 years. But when we were going through this, there were a number of dossiers that were presented to the committee, and then it's the obligation of that committee to go out and hear these people if they're to be heard somewhere. But we had one from a woman who had her theological degree, and she had been a missionary in South Africa, and she had worked in other capacities in the church, I suppose substituting maybe for some pastors, but working in counseling or something, and she sounded really good to me. But there were a couple of guys on that committee who were adamant that they couldn't even think about that. And by that time I had become a fledgling writer, and I was writing a newspaper column for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram. And I was so frustrated on one occasion when I came home from the night's meeting, I sat down and wrote a letter to the Lord and suggested the names of all these people who had been recommended to the committee, starting with Joan of Arc and St. Augustine and Martin Luther, and well, I got it right down there to Jesus, and I was asking for, counsel from God on as to who we might choose. And I suggested at the end that maybe you would like to come yourself and take this over. I don't know whether that had any influence, but I know the next time we met, we decided to invite that woman who stayed for 10 years and was much beloved of the church until the day she died, which was just quite...
What was her name?
Nada Such.
Can you spell her last name?
Sutch. So that was one bright moment in the church history.
Any other committees or things you feel that you had an influence within the church besides just finding a minister?
Remember, we had a member who became highly thought of in this community because she gave the property for the Metro Park down in the valley. And she left a little bit of property to the church. And the Metro Park, which is now, what is it, 30 years old? When did they just celebrated I can't think when they were actually instituted as a Metro Park, but the Mill Hollow Park in the valley, in the Vermilion River Valley, was donated by Dorothy Bacon DeMuth, who was a part of that original Bacon family that established the Brownhelm Church back in the 1800s. And so it was, and she was a member. She came back to Brownhelm in her late years and died here, or was still under our church when she died, under a church domination. And so we had this piece of property, and the park decided that they could use that piece of property themselves later. She left the valley property to them. And I gotta blow my nose. And we finally struck a deal with the park and sold the thing for, here you go, Pat, for $15,000, I think it was, to the park system. And we used the money to buy an organ, a pipe organ from Oberlin College. It was one of the student learner instruments, and we were able to purchase that and have it refurbished, put in good shape, and we put an elevator in with that $15,000.
Wow.
Which was a nice nice memory.
Yeah,
of
about what
Dorothy
year
Bacon DeMuth.
Yeah, what year would have that been about generally?
We were very early on with that. Whenever that law was passed, public buildings had to have an elevator.
Okay.
And I suppose, if I went through my writings, I could put a pinpoint on it, but I don't know right now. It's probably at least 10, 15 years ago. 15, I guess. I never finished with the thing. The actual church building, as it now stands, was constructed, I think, in 1850.
Oh.
So it isn't as old as some of the churches farther west, but it's only because it was the third church building that, I mean, churches farther east, east of Cleveland, would go back farther. But that building is, and we lost the church tower, the spire, in a tornado back before my time. It must have been blown off in the 30s, or I don't know exactly when, but it's never been quite as pretty because we put a spire on it, but it's not the same. It's sort of a blister or something.